Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Wednesday, October the 15th in the Memorial Arena in Victoria. I want to start off, we talk about a lot of different subjects on this program, but I think essentially they all come down to it's always the same issue, that our governments don't work for us, and the media has been turned into a propaganda machine. So I want to start off talking about ISIS, or ISIL, and the fact that Canada is now going over to the Middle East with fighter planes and people to get into a war over there. And I'm reading on the internet from very good sources, reputable journalists, authors, professors, that ISIL was in fact created by, funded by, controlled by, works for the government of the United States. But the media won't tell us that. So the question is, would the people who run the United States create a false enemy and make them as horrible as you can possibly make people in order to give them the excuse to go into a war? And I would say absolutely yes, 100% they would. I have no doubt in my mind. And we can go back to the example of the same people who run the United States funding Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in the late 1920s and early 30s to build up the Nazi Party so they could take over Germany. This is historical fact. If anybody Googles Bush, Hitler, and Guardian, the Guardian being the British newspaper, they will see the story. There's no question about it. And if you just look around Google. So the question is, why won't our media ever report to us the fact that Western industrialists, including the Bush family, were involved in funding Adolf Hitler and the Nazis? This is an extremely important question, especially when they may be doing exactly the same thing right now, and our media won't even mention that fact. So I suggest everybody phone up your media, and say, why won't you report this story? The fact that the West, major American corporations, and no doubt Canadian as well, using, in many cases, a bank controlled or run by or with senior involvement from the Bush family to fund Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, are they now doing the same thing? I mean, it's a question that we have to ask.
Well, there's lots of stuff to think about, when you bring that up. I mean, I could go on a long history of the Bush family. I'm not going to get into that, but, there's a long sordid history of the Bush family, starting with Prescott Bush and George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr., always being affiliated with the war industry and intelligence and doing all sorts of nasty things. We do have the internet, Jack, and as you say, you've been looking on the internet, and this is, you can figure out what sources are credible quite quickly on the internet. You can check sources, you can do all sorts of things. It's a good place to get information. I don't think we're ever going to get the truth out of the corporate media because they're owned by the people that want to do all this nasty stuff. So we're going to always be stuck with the corporate media doing what they're doing. Now, what to me is a big letdown is the drift that the CBC has, got into in the last 10 years of, drifting towards that corporate line, not challenging the standard sort of pronouncements that come out of people like that invented ISIS. A story. ISIS is a story that's been invented, but we can't check that story because we can't go to Syria to try to interview people. It's very convenient that we can't do that for the people who invented the story, like the people who invented the story about the weapons of mass destruction, and the people that invented the story about the incubator babies and
it seems like the people who invented the story of Adolf Hitler. Because if the West was funding Adolf Hitler and the Nazis back in the 30s, then who were we fighting?
Yeah.
Were they running both sides? I mean, it's so bizarre. We live in such a bizarre moment, and there has to be more access to the truth. Yes, the internet is great, but they control virtually every daily newspaper in the country, every radio station in the country, every television station in the country, and it's very difficult for the people of this nation to overcome that. I think an important step is, you know, we've got to go after the Canadian media. People have to just ridicule it. I mean, see it for what it is, which is not a purveyor. They don't care about the news or the information or the truth or honesty or justice. It's a propaganda machine. It's a propaganda machine that we somehow have to beat back and retake our nation.
For sure.
And you know, we're going to talk about other issues, but I think they all come down to the same issue. It's this, the media and the fact that our governments, our politicians are controlled by some uber force.
Yeah, it's such a, you know, pervasive ideology that in our society. And, you know, I always tell people that one of the books that changed my life was a book by John Ralston Saul called The Unconscious Civilization, because it addresses these questions of how what you say is true. We look around, we know this is going on. How does it persist? Even when people know that this is wrong, somehow we can't change it. And in that book, John Ralston Saul examines that whole conundrum of how do we think one way and act another way. And his thesis is that we act in an unconscious fashion. We really do not comprehend the ramifications of what we're doing in our daily lives, and we somehow believe that no matter what we do, it's not going to have an impact, whether we're doing good or not. I mean, people go to work and work for very large corporations and make terrible decisions every day. Somehow they're able to detach that from, you know, global climate change or you know, all the other bad things that are happening. So I think we're always going to be stuck in this kind of limbo.
Did he have a solution for that problem?
Well, if you're unconscious, you have to wake up. Let's face it. And now the thing is, like, when, you know, in my years of trying to convince people of almost anything, I realized that I'm not a good person to do that, because people seem to come to every issue with a preset of notions and are not open to new ideas. They don't want to hear new ideas, because if you want to remain unconscious, you have to block out new ideas. And in our society right now, people block out new ideas. People don't want to hear anything that will change the paradigm of the way they're thinking. They have their gadgets, they have their lifestyles, they have their prestige, got a nice shiny car, you work for the government, you're pulling down 150 grand a year in some ministry, doing God knows what.
Well,
life
only
is good.
the
Well,
very,
those are the
very
people that are
top
making the
people.
decisions, Jack.
Yes.
And they can stay in their bubble.
So
And
you're
they,
talking about this small group at the very top.
Well, those are the people
Although-
that are making the decisions now, the 1% of the 1%. And they're managing to stay unconscious. They're not really nasty people. They're just simply not aware. And they're very resistant to hearing ideas that might change their worldview.
Okay, so let's take an issue that's actually happening in the news right now, which is the decision by Christy Clark yesterday. So today's October the 15th, Wednesday. So yesterday, the BC government, Christy Clark, decided to take the next step towards building the Site C dam. To me, this is, I mean, it's completely insane. And Christy Clark doesn't even work for the people of this province. She sold us out a long time ago, and she answers to a higher authority than the people of BC. And yet, so here we are. What can we, the people of the province, I mean, I think the first question should be, what do we think? Do we have enough information about it? I think I do. I have enough information to know that I'm totally and completely opposed to the idea. But maybe I'm wrong. So, you know, let's get more information. But then shouldn't they find out what we think and then do that? And yet, that is not what's happened. And it's a big story today, but it'll be gone tomorrow, I assume. And we'll all forget about it we've got Ebola, we've got ISIS, we've got, what more do you need? I mean, everything else gets covered over, and it's always the next story.
Well, yeah, I'm naturally, and I think you are too, you look at things firstly as the impact on the environment, and of course the people that live there in the environment, you don't try to separate it. It's all part and parcel of living in harmony with nature and all that. And the Site C Dam is like, there's nothing to be said that in any way could be going to enhance that region. You're going to put it underwater. The thing is, like recently in the last few years, and this has happened with BC Hydro too, is that we were always arguing about dams and the impact on the environment. Well, on the hard economic issues that maybe those who are asleep might wake up when you tell them that, in fact, this Site C Dam is just not needed, that there's engineers' reports that tells us if we just develop the dams on the Columbia River Basin, that means the dams are there, put the turbines in, turn them on.
So we have dams right now that can generate...
Are not fully operational. You can generate the same amount as you get at a Site C. So are we saying, oh, we need Site C, and then we're going to need all these other dams? Well, or how about why don't we just, or these other turbines activated? Or why don't we just activate what we have, which could make us some money?
But also, we don't even need the electricity. We've got enough electricity. There is no need now or in the near-term or mid-term future, as far as I know. That's what the studies say. We don't need the electricity. The only reason we could need the electricity is for liquefied natural gas. Christy Clark's LNG poison dream, because that's what it is. She wants to poison this province with fracking and build an LNG empire for a small group of people who are going to make a lot of money out of it while poisoning all the rest of us. Now, LNG, what you have to do is you have a gas, natural gas, and you have to cool it, I think it's to about minus 140 in order to liquefy it, LNG, liquefied natural gas, and put it onto these ships and send it off to where they can sell it, maybe. And that requires huge amounts of electricity. So like a large plant, and they're planning several large plants, but I've read, I think, that a large LNG plant where the liquefaction happens requires as much electricity as a major city like Edmonton. The city was mentioned was Edmonton. So is that why the Site C is why the Peace River area is going to be flooded? To me that makes sense. I assume that's what they're doing because I don't believe anything else they tell us.
Yeah, I mean, they want to do Site C because, of course, the taxpayers are going to pay for it.
That too.
So it's not a big deal. For the people who build these things, they all make money. And all their friends and everybody does very well, thank you. And if we can give that power, if they can give that power away to some of their other friends that are mining up north or doing some other liquefied natural gas, I mean, all the better. I mean, the whole plan for the liquefied natural gas is that you do have to completely give everything away to the companies that are going to do it, or they're not going to do the work. It'll be a lot cheaper for us if we just don't do it and maybe just give them all some money anyway to go away. I mean, it's ridiculous the way that the plan is. And don't forget that the leadership of the NDP are just as enamored with liquefied natural gas as the Liberals are. So, we have this Liberal NDP coalition in several places that really defies logic.
Maybe what we should think about as the people who live in this province is a citizens' assembly on the economy. What, and you almost have to say on the economy and the environment. What would we like to have? How would we like, because we're never asked. I mean, I've lived my whole life here. I've never been asked. Have any of us ever been asked? What do you want for the, I mean, I'm a member of the NDP, even they don't ask me. They just do what they want and they ask me for money every week. I assume the other political parties are the same. So a citizens' assembly, which is just you assemble a randomly selected group of people, maybe 50 or 100 or 150, whatever, and they meet over a period of time on an issue like what would we like our economy and environment to look like here in BC. And it's amazing what average, everyday, honest citizens can come up with. It's magnificent, actually.
Yeah.
And that way we'd know what we want instead of being manipulated by the politicians who work for the corporations and the media.
I think you could do that online. I think you could have those forums and share those ideas. I think a lot of that is going on already. And
yeah, but it would be nice to have it, televise it. Televise
Sure.
it on CBC, televise the meetings, let the people of the province hear what people are saying and thinking, bring in experts, let's move ahead.
yeah.
Takes a budget. Certainly no part of the government is going to fund it, but you know, that's the kind of stuff we have to be doing, and those are the directions we have to be moving in, I think, if we want to move ahead.
Yeah. What do we have, Jackie? We talked, well, maybe we should talk about local elections a little bit.
Okay, sounds good.
Someday I'm going to have to buy a newspaper and read and see what's going on.
You won't find it in the newspaper.
I know that's what the problem is, but it seems to me that we've had this massive issue about the sewage treatment, the huge, big sewage treatment system that was a terrible idea from the start, and they almost got away with it.
Yes.
Now it's sort of sidetracked, on the back burner, or completely off the table. We don't know for sure, but the thing is that I wonder how many politicians that were on the CRD, that were really carrying this forward, are going to be pounding the table when they are running and saying, we should have had this sewage treatment plant. By golly, if I get elected, I'm going to be pushing for this again.
Not one.
And that's an $800 million project, and probably be a lot more in the end. So I'd love to see some, in the local politics, something happening that was a little bit different, because I really believe that this is where we have a chance to have a little bit of democracy, is the local politics. And I'd love to see, for instance, on the ballot, a none of the above. On the ballot, you name all the people that are running, and then a none of the above. Just a little box, a little bit of ink on some paper. I don't think it's going to really cost that much. And also, I think we should have a threshold of say, if you have a certain percentage of the public has to come out and vote. Now, we won't make it too hard on them. Like, municipal elections, I think around 20% of the population votes. So let's just call it 30%. If you don't get 30% of people coming in to vote, the election's null and void. They have to start talking about things that are relevant enough to the point where people would actually show up and vote on it. But I'd like to see something happening in the local politics that would be a little more dynamic.
Well, I agree, and to me it comes down to the same thing, because you start to see the signs, and you start to get the brochures in the mailbox, and they're telling us their ideas, and I want to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to be good for business, and I'm going to lower your taxes, and I'm thinking, actually, I don't care what you think. I don't care what you think. What I want you to do is find out what we think, the citizens who live in the city that you want to be a city councillor of. And you should swear that you're going to make sure that people have honest information. Here in Victoria, it's a disgrace the way our city council and the CRD on the broader issues manipulates public opinion by controlling the information. It's an absolute disgrace. So to me, I would support people who are going to say, we're going to make sure that the public has good information. We're going to find out what the public wants. We're going to do polling. We're going to do focus groups. We're going to go out. We're going to have public meetings, and then we'll do what you want. I mean, why doesn't that idea ever even get a mention?
We're so out of it. I mean, the public is just so out of it, and have been for so long. The culture is not of engagement.
All of us.
Because people are trying to get engaged and are thinking, just look at the process and say, this is nuts. Like, for instance, the CRD. I mean, when I first came to this region and to people are talking about the CRD way back in the day, and trying to figure out what the heck is that? Well, the mayor picks a buddy or friend or somebody who seems to have some expertise and they send them off to the CRD. Well, they get to make all these massive decisions, hundreds of millions of dollars of decisions. Don't you think we should just elect them? Don't you think we should just have an election for the CRD? I mean, what are these people that the mayor is sending off have any special qualifications than anybody else? Why is it we can't vote for them? It's not that big a deal. You vote for the CRD, and then you could actually get an idea of what decisions they actually make.
Maybe.
Or they'll, you could press them on it. Right now, it's so convoluted. Well, what you get is you get these massive projects almost going through, ridiculous projects that are going to cost us hundreds of millions of dollars, needlessly spending money, because we have no control over these guys.
Yeah. And that's the problem. We have no control over them. I mean, that's not democracy. That's what it comes right down to.
No, it's the last thing in the world you want to see. For a lot of these people, they don't want the public to be engaged, because that might stifle their agenda.
Yeah. Walter, we're out of time.
Well, here you go. I hope we didn't bum people out too badly.
Well, I mean, things are bad, but
yeah.
I'm not bummed out. I'm thinking we got to move ahead, but we got to do it. Thanks for watching Citizens Forum. Welcome back. In this segment, we're talking to Eric Anderson, and we're filming in a different studio, as you can see. We're talking about a subject that's very important to all of us, which is the future of the CPP, the Canada Pension Plan, something that a lot of us are going to be depending on. Eric, you spent your career as an economist, so this isn't a topic that's new to you.
Not at all.
And let's just start off. What is happening with the CPP?
I think it's a better place to start what is happening with pension plans globally, and then get to the CPP, which is part of the fabric of the whole story.
Okay.
It seems there is enough evidence, and I contend that governments and central banks and commercial banks have targeted in a determined way to take control of the global pension plan investment business. Now, that's a big statement, and it encompasses a whole lot of things.
Say it one more time, just so people have got it.
Those folks want your money. Simple.
Yes, yes. Our pension plan is now being taken over and used for something other than our future pensions.
Well, they would argue that,
yes,
of course. And do argue it. But it's up to the audience and the individual to figure out if there's a risk there or not, if you look at the evidence first. So I think it's important to put things in context, and so most people, I think, would understand the concept of a business cycle. It's when you think of anything that's in a cyclical pattern. You can look around all sorts of things, like season of the year is a cycle. There's a period of growth, and then there's a period of retrenchment. Things start to fall in on themselves and build for the next occasion. These cycles get exaggerated, extremely exaggerated, by the overuse of credit and the overprovision of credit. So what happens in that case, the consuming end of the model of economics in the world thinks it can buy forever and a lot, and does, because this credit seems to be unlimited. That signals the producing end of the world in the business of producing goods to spool up and get ready to produce a lot more, and they do. The trouble is when you come to the turnover, like we had in '08, all that productive capacity is then not needed. It's stranded investment. And the particular tricky part of this stranded investment is that it's like musical chairs. Who's going to take the parcel and live with it? Because all of a sudden these assets are not worth anything. Most dramatic example would be the shipping industry. International shipping industry is measured by something called the Baltic Dry Cargo. In 2008, that index stood at 13,000. 6 months later, 9 months later, it was down to 600. That's like over a 90% drop in less than a year. Now that measures the global activity of trading on dry goods around the world. And since '09, it's struggled maybe up to 2,000 as an index, but mostly it's hung around 1,000 and has never recovered. So we're in a period where consolidation, write-off assets are happening. And
so what does that tell, those numbers tell people who are listening? What is that saying about the world's economy?
We're sick.
Okay.
We're going through a period of recuperation. And we don't know how long it's going to be, but in the case of Japan, they've lived with it for over 15 years or 20. And the latest example of that is a statement by the governor of the Bank of Japan at a meeting in Colorado about a month ago. So it's real and it's unpleasant. Now, in the case of a measure that is something like measuring the income of a person or a country to handle debt, there's a measure called the total credit market debt as a percentage of gross domestic product. Prior to the last depression, I'm not saying there's not one more coming.
When you say the last depression, do you mean 1920?
1930s.
1930s, okay.
The steady state for that index was between 130 and 160% of gross domestic product. That is, the global debt in the United States was at about 130 to 160% of gross domestic product, which is a measure of the income of a country annually. That pretty much stayed around 150 and 160% right up till about 1985. In 1985, it started growing, and it is currently at or over 400%. Now, if you ever think of a hockey stick, that's one. So it's just a demonstration of the condition that the United States is in, but a lot of other countries, including Canada.
And so what this is there's a lot more debt than there used to be.
Big time.
Okay.
Very large amount. So anyway, that's the condition of the globe. It's a sick globe in an economic and financial term. So the Bank of England, in a presentation by Andrew Haldane in April of this year, made the representation that assets, investments that are in pension funds, the asset value, is something that should be used in the interests of the state and the general economy. It's almost like a statement of, loyalty to the state, that you make an investment that you might not otherwise do.
So in April of this year, the Bank of England said that our pension money should not be necessarily used to protect our pensions, but should be used to take care of the world's
Exactly.
economy or the world's bankers.
Well, that's by extension, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And the scale of the asset that Andrew had mentioned to his audience is pretty big. On a global basis, it's estimated that money invested for pension purposes around the globe is at, or was at, about 87 trillion US dollars. with the expectation of over 100 trillion by the year 2020. Now, that's one heck of a lot of money.
So we're talking right now around $87 trillion
Trillion.
in pension funds
Yeah.
around the world.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can see it's a big fat target for those who want to gain access to sort of offload some of their dog investments.
Right. So what I think you're saying is that there's a lot of big players around the world who have invested money in places that they can see those assets are going to be going down, and they want our pension money to
Bail
start
them out.
to bail them out.
Yeah,
And is that now happening?
yeah. So what Andrew is talking about is that there's two kinds of investment strategies that sort of characterize the general direction of pension investments. One is pro-cyclicality, which is a bogus term for just investing when it's in equities, the risky part of it, when things are stable, and then as they become frothy and the credit balloons and the economy grows at an accelerated rate, you start taking money away from the equity portion. So his example was 10 years ago in the UK, they had the pension industry had about 50% of its money invested in equities. Now it's down to around 10%. So as equities have followed this business cycle up, they become riskier. That's the point of it. And so people who are working for their clients, the yous and me's of the world, have taken away money off the investment in equities and put it aside into more certain investments like bonds to wait out the cycle a little bit. And so the Bank of England and the banks don't like that. They want to do something different, and they're talking about something called contra-cyclical investment. And that is when all the things that tells you the world is at risk, greater risk right now, and causes you to hold back putting your money into equities.
Now, when you say equities, you mean buying stocks and bonds of corporations around the world?
Stocks,
Stocks,
not
sorry,
bonds.
not bonds, stocks.
Yeah, stocks.
Investing in companies, yeah.
Yeah,
So we can see that's becoming perhaps more dangerous.
very much more.
Okay,
Yeah.
and the Bank of England is saying now is the time to put our pension money into those things.
That's right, because it's your sovereign right and duty.
That's your duty, right? And what is the Canada Pension Plan doing in
Well, now that gets interesting, doesn't it? The Canada Pension Plan was in 2000 only invested up to 5% of its portfolio in stocks, equities.
Okay.
The last statement, which is March of this year, they had taken that up to about 50%.
So, the Canada Pension Plan used to have in 2000 5% of our pension money invested in equities,
Correct.
and now in 2014 that's up to 50%.
Correct.
50% of the entire CPP fund is invested in equities, which could
Yeah.
be ready to take a tumble.
And that's the total, which includes the money that's liabilities.
Which is money that the CPP has borrowed in order to
Essentially,
invest.
yeah. The auditor for the fund describes it as liabilities. That's all it is. These are monies, they're about 35 billion out of the total of 245 or so that is essentially, I guess you could say, is borrowed money.
So right now the Canada Pension Plan is $250 billion.
Yeah, total.
Okay.
Net is less the 35.
Right. And half of that is invested in,
No, half of the total.
yes, is
Half
invested
of
in
the total,
equities,
the 250.
which you feel is not necessarily the way we should be going, especially at this point in time.
Well, yes, and in particular because of another factor, and that is that private equities, according to the statement this year, are 41 billion. And private equities are those investments that you are not able to value for statement purpose based on outside independent information regarding trading. So the way the valuation takes place is that the CP fund itself, its board, has a group that determine what the value of those investments should be, and it's called mark to market. No, sorry, mark to model. Model is when you don't know what the market value is, but you model a one. And market is when you have a reference of third-party trading activity and you've got that as your reference. So basically it's a trust us kind of valuation because, of course, the Canada Pension Plan values does an audit on its own original purchases. And that's kind of a conflict of interest idea. I mean, I can't see them saying, okay, we bought $100 million of this particular private equity 2 years ago, and we're going to suddenly say it's only worth 50 million. Isn't going to happen. So there's that conflict in there that I find really troublesome, and I spoke about it to the Finance Committee in '09 and said I didn't like it, and they didn't seem to care.
We're running low on time, Eric. You wanted to talk a little bit about Mark Carney and what you called his dress rehearsal.
Right. I'd say it's coincidental, but it looks suspicious to me. Mark came into Canada as the governor of the Bank of Canada, and then we sort of went in this direction of, I'd say, contra investing with the Canada Pension Plan. And so we now have what I described earlier. Lots of debt, so on. He's moved on to England. Now he's there, and the speech by Andrew was, right, I have to think, right out of Mark's mouth.
Right.
And he wouldn't have been allowed to make that speech unless Mark was supportive.
Right. And it's worth mentioning that Mark Carney spent, I think, 13 years with Goldman Sachs.
It
and
happens.
Who does he really work for?
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
And so now they're putting this up as a proposal to pension managers in the UK. Right. And that'll be the ongoing model they'll roll out.
Now, we're way ahead of the UK because we have, right now, 50% invested in stocks.
Yeah.
The UK, only 5%, I think you said.
Yeah. 10.
Oh, can you mention some of the things that the CPP has bought that might not be the smartest way to invest?
Individual,
no.
Okay. I had a list of them, and it's too long to go into.
Okay.
And they're difficult to explain, but I got them. If it comes to that, I can sure trot them out.
I saw things like I saw a list years ago from somewhere saying shopping centers in Australia, those kinds of.
Oh yeah. And they bought a freight forwarder in Canada. Made an investment about 5 or 6 years ago, right at the time that the international shipping took a nosedive by 90%.
So I think the risk is that our pension money is now being used to bail out wealthy people and banks and investors who have money in assets that everybody can see is coming down, and our pension money is being used to fund that.
Yeah, we're soft targets, yeah.
We're soft targets.
Yeah.
Eric, we're almost out of time. One last comment about all this?
Well, I'd only like to encourage the viewers to pick up a pen and write their member of Parliament. I do my part, but it's obviously not enough, and more is better.
We're out of time. Thank you very much for watching this. The media doesn't care. Our politicians don't care. It's up to us. Watch out for the Canada Pension Plan. Thanks for watching this segment.
Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Wednesday, October the 15th in the Memorial Arena in Victoria. I'd like to thank our volunteer crew, great volunteer crew, and the Shaw staff who makes it happen. The guest in this segment is Beau Filter. And Beau, you're a veteran. You spent 4 years in the U.S. Navy, which is where this all started. Mm-hmm. You're a social scientist, a geopolitical analyst, and author of The Cause of Wars and Aggression, Book 1. And I'm just going to read part of a book review about The Cause of Wars and Aggression. And this is written by Harvey Mindes, retired president and psychology professor at Antioch University in Los Angeles. Okay. Your book is a truly remarkable accomplishment, a life work on an exceptionally important and controversial issue, written in low key, though it deals with a subject that is truly a matter of life or death, not just for a few individuals, but for the entire human race. It's also written in a steady, logical, pleasant style. I agree with your thesis 100%. I see this work as a textbook at the college level, and as such, I think it could become a classic. Well, that's high praise indeed. Yeah.
I was very pleased to get that,
Yeah,
for sure, yes.
So, what is the book about, and what are your thoughts about? And we're going to go into it by talking about the issues of the day, and you're going to start with what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. Well, just to say a word about the book, it's the deep psychology of wars, all past wars, current wars, and future wars. So it's hard to get into that on a superficial way in talking about it here, but basically dogmas play a key role in the human brain and traps human thinking so that we're unable to escape our pattern of wars. So just saying that as kind of nutshell, it gets very deep very quickly, so we won't get into that at this point. But looking at the big picture, mentioning Ukraine, some updates that are very important for the world and your viewers to know about, because it's not covered in the Western press, is that you may recall that when Malaysian airliner MH17 went down, there was a report put out that it looked like it had been shot down by the Kiev government itself, which is of course US backed. And but the person who put out the report disappeared. So people were kind of speculating, well, maybe this is just someone just having a little fun or something. Well, the news today is now they have been able to actually identify that person and what he actually said. So his name is Jose Carlos Barrios Sanchez, and he was actually working in the air traffic control tower when MH17 went down, and he witnessed the Kiev military come in and take over the operation, who then rerouted MH17 to go right over the danger zone of the fighting.
Where was he working?
In the air traffic control in Kiev, the Kiev airport. And the military came in and took over control and therefore started directing the aircraft, MH17, to a lower altitude so it could be reached by one of their fighters and off right into the traffic of where the fighting was going on so that it could be blamed on the Russian separatists. Right. Okay, it was supposed to be 400 miles south of where it was.
So
they redirected it right from Kiev.
Yeah, the coverage by the Canadian media on what's been happening in the Ukraine over the past many months is, I mean, it borders on the criminal, the leaving out of the truth and the manipulation of public opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I think, and I mean, that's what they always do.
Well, they work very much for the U.S. State Department, which the biggest job they have is censoring the truth as it comes out. Now, this report that I'm just giving you is out all over the world, but not where we live. It's just, you're absolutely right. They do censor it, and that really is an important job for them because They don't want us to know who's actually behind all this. So I want to quote to you what they found that he actually said on his way out before, because he took off. Carlos took off. We don't know where he is today, but we know exactly now what he said. I'm going to quote what he said. This was a hurried message. Quote, "Military has taken control of air traffic control in Kiev. Before they remove my phone or they break my head, shot down by Kiev. No accident. No accident. It was shot down." End of quote. So he fled, and we don't know where he is today. So now we have a lot of positive corroboration of it being shot down. We have his testimony of what happened in the air traffic control. And now we have the OSCE, which is the international body that came to inspect the wreckage. They have documented and taken pictures of the actual plane fuselage being riddled with 30 millimeter fire from the plane. And so we
not
have
shot down by a missile.
It was not shot down by a missile. It was shot down by a fighter jet. And then we have Russian radar that pinpointed a Kiev fighter coming up behind the airliner. And now we have the Malaysian government actually accusing Kiev and the United States for shooting down MH17.
The Malaysian government is saying that?
The Malaysian government is saying that, yes.
And yet that's not being reported in North America?
No, their flagship newspaper has said that they're accusing the United States of doing this. So, you know, this is hot information. And so a little more before we go into what that created. But a German newspaper, which isn't under the shield and protection of the pro-war propagandists here in North America, they said they actually interviewed the man in the plane, the jet fighter, that pushed the automatic button that riddled the plane. And they go on to say that in this particular circumstance, the plane was actually was piloted by a CIA pilot who was Polish with the U.S. Was a U.S. citizen, and that after the job, he took off. They gave him a new passport and name, and they took off. And his name, what they gave was Peter Hiller, age 41. Now, the CIA won't ever give a real name, and anyone who's viewing, they could say, well, gee, this could just be, you know, just a spiel, you know. But what gives it strength to me is the fact that I have watched the CIA over decades, and this is a very common of their modus operandi, is to set in, hit contract men, take them out, give them new names, new passports, and gone. That's the end of the story.
So I mean, this is the first I'm hearing of much of this.
Okay.
And all I can say is, I believe this more than I believe what we're being told in our media. I've stopped believing them completely. After having been lied to for decades, which is how I feel, I just don't believe the official story that they give us anymore about anything. This to me is certainly very plausible. We all have to investigate, you know.
Well, there's other corroborating evidence. So we call that positive corroborating evidence because it points to someone. Now, in the absence, we call it negative corroborating evidence. We have Kiev refusing to give over the air traffic control tapes of what actually happened. They say they don't know what happened to them. And then we have the fact that the U.S. has always refused to give over their satellite image. They had a satellite watching what was going on. Some people have speculated that they were actually directing what was going on at that particular time at the moment.
And that won't be made public.
And that's not being made public, that's right. And then the other thing was that, of course, they dropped the story right away, and they also blamed Russia immediately as soon as the plane had hardly hit the ground. Now that's usually when the CIA is doing a frame-up of a country. they have the storyline all ready to go. So as soon as the plane hits the ground, you know, it's all over Western media. You know, it's shot
Putin
down
did it.
by Putin did it by a missile. Get Putin, get
And
Putin.
you know, it's just worth mentioning that the entire Vietnam War, in which 1.5 million innocent people in Vietnam were killed, was based on a similar lie, an
Absolutely.
attack on a U.S. warship by the North Vietnam Navy that never happened, which they admitted has never happened. But 1.5 million people died. America was ripped apart by that. These people who run the world are crazy. I mean, that's all you can say. So anything is possible.
That's right. They're what we generally call psychopaths because they don't have any feelings or conscience and how other people are hurt. It doesn't matter how many people get killed to them, as long as they're getting what they want, then everything is just fine. The real, the most horrible aspect of their behavior is the fact that they are so invisible in their behavior. They look sharp, they are very clever people, they look just like your normal person, but they don't have a conscience, and that's not always available to see. But if you start talking to them at an intimate level, you start to see they don't care about who gets hurt. Like Madame Albright, for example, when she said, oh yeah, 500,000 Iraqi children dying because they needed to get Saddam Hussein out over a lie was worth it. She said it was a cost that was worth it. So we won't get into that because that's a whole new line. But you can see here that what's happened here, now that the heat is on the US and Kiev, which is a Nazi regime, by the way, the heat is on them over MH17 downing, shooting it down and killing all those people. It's an emergency for them. They had to get the spotlight, turn all the cameras back to the Middle East. Suddenly, ISIS. If you were following it carefully, as soon as this news was coming out and I was watching it, I thought, look out, here comes the big exit. And bingo, just like that, ISIS, even though it was kind of percolating in the background, now it's center stage, and Ukraine goes way down into the dark, you know.
Where can people go on Google or, you know, somewhere on the internet to find this kind of information? Is there...
Well, if they just Google the topic, they'll get something. But one of the best websites that I tell people to go to is globalresearch.ca out of Ottawa. That's a good starting point. Another one is Information Clearinghouse out of Los Angeles. Two good starting points, and that will spread you out into rivers and valleys you've never seen before. So once we get into Syria now. So now the big thing is, oh, we got to get ISIS now, because now Russia, we got to figure out what we're going to do about Russia now, because, and of course now just yesterday the Australian Prime Minister says, oh yeah, well we're still going to get Russia over what they're doing in Ukraine, and of course mum's the word about MH17 and the fact that the Kiev government is actually a Nazi junta put in power by the U.S. government. So anyway, so what comes out in the last week in Syria is Vice President Joe Biden admits mistakenly at a speech that the CIA all these years has been funding ISIL, ISIS, FSA, that's the Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Nusra. And I want to show you this picture because when we look at them, we want to look at the beginning of them. And the beginning of them is actually...
The picture will be on the screen.
Yes, okay, that's going to be on the screen. But what it is, I want to tell your viewers what it is. It's a picture of Ronald Reagan and the original Mujahideen came, and they were getting instructions for him on how to wage a war in Afghanistan against Russia.
And this was the beginning of the American creation of the whole terrorist thing that has now destroyed Iraq, destroyed Syria, destroyed, I mean, the Americans have destroyed those countries, not the American people, but the people who run the US government. And it's led directly to where we are now with ISIL or ISIS, and that's their plan. I mean, I don't see how, to me, that's their plan.
Well, it's absolutely their plan. They've made it very clear. They want to keep all these areas destabilized because their drive is to take control of all the world's oil supplies. And wherever Russia is shipping oil to Europe, they're trying to disrupt, bomb them, and then take control of those oil lines. or set up their own. So in the background, which is in none of the news, is this constant negotiating, trying to get groups to sign off their oil to U.S. Corporate oil corporations. Meanwhile, they're disrupting oil in Ukraine and trying to stop Russia from shipping, because they really need to stop a friendly relationship. So really what they're doing is they're creating an iron curtain between Russia's oil and the West. So we might call it an iron oil curtain between Russia and Europe. And that's because they're desperate that if Russia continues to make a lot of money and have a friendly relationship with Europe, then America is going to lose its primacy in the world, not just in Europe, but in the world at large. So they're very desperate right now to hang on to power, and their only grip is the petrodollar. And you see, the petrodollar actually is the Federal Reserve note, and the Federal Reserve note is absolutely worthless. It began in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve, and it's Nixon took it off the gold standard in 1973, I think it was, and then they tried to marry it. They had negotiations to marry it to oil so that everyone had to buy oil in American dollars. That's the only thing that gives it any power. So if they can strip that away, then that's where their Achilles.
I think you said that's happening with the BRICS currency.
That's right. The BRICS are trying to
And
desperately escape.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS.
That's right. Now, in this late hour, other countries, they're extremely afraid of the U.S. and the shock that the U.S. can do to them. But they're desperately wanting to join the BRICS because they don't want these useless U.S. dollars anymore. Nobody does, but Russia is finally selling some off. China, they got to get rid of them because all these years the U.S. has been able to sell these or spend this money, this useless money, into the world, and people have to accept it, and it's absolutely useless currency to them. So when we look at other things where the U.S. is trying to bowl in, it's everywhere they go, there's an oil issue. So if we go to
oil prices are collapsing right now, they tell us.
Yes, and that's because they're trying to destroy the Russian economy. They're hoping they can hold them, suppress them long enough that the ruble will collapse, and then they can go in and disassemble them. Now, this whole plan, was started.
I'm afraid we're out of time.
We're out of time
Yeah.
already?
Yeah.
Gosh. Too bad we didn't get a chance to talk about Brzezinski, because the blueprint is in his book.
Next time.
Okay?
Thanks for watching Citizens Forum.